Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. Welcome back, guys. We are almost through with January, which is, typically the slowest month for movies and TV, but we got some good stuff coming, guys. And also, shows like Severance, shows like Harley Quinn are out and been enjoying both. And, also shows like Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which we'll talk about later on in the episode, are coming out soon. Obviously, Captain America, Brave New World, Paddington, and Caruso, February, gonna kick off, and we're gonna head into Oscar season very, very soon. We already are in Oscar season, as we'll talk about the nominations for the 2025 Academy Awards. But guys, it's been exciting. There's a whole lot to get into, no matter what week it is. So I thank you all again just so much for joining us on another episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod. Make sure to subscribe, give this video a like if you're watching on YouTube. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because our podcast feed is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Overcast as well, just make sure to give it a rating and let me know what you think about the podcast there if you're interested in the audio only format. The links are in the description down below as always. Guys, it is a joy to be with you all again, and without further ado, let's get into the topics. Alright guys, so Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew has wrapped up, which is so sad to me, because Skeleton Crew, for those of you who haven't been watching my immediate reactions or my spoiler discussions for the show, for those of you who don't know, Skeleton Crew has easily by far and away become my favorite Star Wars Disney Plus show. It probably is up there for me with Clone Wars in terms of overall Star Wars shows, and Clone Wars to me just has a very, very special place in my heart. But Skeleton Crew was amazing, and I wanted to take a second now that we're about a week separated from the end of Skeleton Crew, to think about what Skeleton Crew did right. And, for me, there hasn't been another Star Wars show that has come out, the live action ones, that has just really captivated me in the same way, which may be shocking to you guys, because I know a lot of you love Andor in a very similar way to the level that you guys have been loving Skeleton Crew. And for me, Andor just didn't quite hit that same level. I don't know what it was, honestly, and I'm looking forward to doing hopefully a rewatch before Andor season 2 comes out, because I think that I may want to revisit what it was. But I actually just recently was traveling, and on a plane I watched Andor season 1 episode 1 again, and it just didn't have that same captivating feeling. It's great television, you can tell it's great writing, such care is put into all of it, the acting is great, everything like that. It's awesome, it's great. But it just didn't grab me the same way that even a show like Penguin did, for example. So I wanted to just take a look here and see, what did Skeleton Crew do right that other Star Wars shows didn't? And now, the reason I've been setting this up here is simply because this is all just in my opinion, because I know a lot of you will say, well, I think Andor did a lot of things right. I'm going to say, of course, Andor did a lot of things right. But I want to really examine, it's not about Andor, it's really about Skeleton Crew, although I will touch on things that the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows didn't do for me that Skeleton Crew did, and what Skeleton Crew did right. Because I think Skeleton Crew comes down to two things that I think Skeleton Crew did right, that I think it just pulled them to the next level. And I think, within those two things, there are other amazing things that happen in there as well, the other different categories, but I think two particular things stand out to me. So first things first, so let's take a look back at all the other Disney Plus shows quickly, and I just want to talk about reasons and things that I think those shows didn't do that I think Skeleton Crew did do well. So Mandalorian, right? Mandalorian, and I'm talking about all 3 seasons. I like Mandalorian. I'm not one of those people who hates Mandalorian. I like Mandalorian. That being said, I don't think Mandalorian is without its problems, and you can go all the way back 2020 and 2021, where I did episode by episode spoiler discussions of Mandalorian season 2. And yeah, I enjoyed, Mandalorian season 2, and obviously the last few episodes were great, and Boba Fett was awesome in that show. And season 1 I thought was good. It was good enough, it was fine, and I didn't like season 3. But what the Mandalorian for me was missing was consistency of story, right? And to me, I understand each individual episode was sort of meant to be standalone and whatnot. That's totally fine, because some of my favorite shows are sitcoms where you have individual episodes that are self-contained and whatnot, and sometimes they progress the story forward and sometimes they don't, right? And it doesn't really matter, because you're in for the ride. And then, as the season builds on, and especially from the beginning and at the end, you sort of get the sense of where the overarching story is going. There's a couple key differences, though, between why I think sitcoms can get away with this and why Mandalorian It's harder to, right? Because I think Mandalorian seasons just have side quest episodes, right? They don't even feel like standalone episodes. They feel like side quest episodes. Even the Mandalorian episode in particular, the most egregious one to me was the one in the Book of Boba Fett, which we'll talk about in just a second, where, you know, he's on Tatooine and he's like, I need a new ship. And she's like, go get the part and then come back with the part and you get your new ship. It feels like a video game, right? And for me, it just wasn't enough. And the reason I think that sitcoms can get away with this is simply because they're longer. Sitcoms have 20 to 25 episodes where you go, we're in for the ride, you know, every single week. We just kind of enjoy what's happening and then we go. Mandalorian is 8 episodes. And those episodes, by the way, are not hour-long episodes. They're like 40-minute episodes at the most. Some of them 30-minute episodes. That's the thing with these Star Wars Disney Plus shows. The episodes are short. They're very short. And so to say, hey, you know, Mandalorian Season 1, 8 episodes. Have fun. And each episode, you know, it's like, each episode to me, and maybe this is wrong of me to think this, but each episode is like 1/8 of the show. And if 3 or 4 of them, I'm like, come on, this is filler. Jack Black episode, you know, Frog Egg episode, Naboo Starfighter episode. Like, what are we doing here? And I think that's super disappointing for me. Again, I like the show. I like the characters. I like overall what they were going for. Not so much in season 3, but you know, it's fine. It's good. But I think that's one thing. The consistency of story is something that was missing. And we'll talk about what the difference is, I think, with Skeleton Crew. And there are a couple episodes in there that I think are more filler-ish. But I'll talk about the reasons why I think it's less, you know, egregious for me in Skeleton Crew. Obi-Wan, again, same thing, consistency of story. They just wandered around for a while, right? And it just didn't feel, they spent time with extraneous subplots, and it just didn't feel like they were having a focused story until they got to the very end. Ahsoka, same thing, actually. Consistency of story. Like, what were they doing to where you have the whole season was building up to this, and basically when you look back on the season of Ahsoka, the first season of Ahsoka, the whole season was them switching places. You start out with them looking for Ezra and Thrawn, and Ahsoka, Sabine, and Hera are just hanging out, or well, I guess Hera didn't switch places, but you know, Ahsoka and Sabine are looking for Ezra and Thrawn are on Peridia, and guess what? By the end of the show, they switch places, and that's it. That's the show, and there are no, you know, particular story reasons for Anakin to show up, even though I love those scenes, but there's no particular story reason for them to show up. So consistency of story. Book of Boba Fett is going to the other big bucket that I think Skeleton Crew did right that these other shows didn't. The characters were boring, right? The characters were uninteresting. And I think Boba Fett in that Mandalorian episode was awesome. Maybe that character was not translated well into his own show, and maybe, you know, maybe he just doesn't work as a lead character. I don't know. Who's to say, right? I liked Tamara Morrison a lot, but it just didn't work out that well. Acolyte, I think, suffered. Well, I don't think it's as egregious as many people think it is. I don't hate the show. I don't like it particularly well, but that has nothing to do with any, you know, the actors and all these crazy things that people are saying, just more so the story. And I think that The Acolyte suffers from a little bit of both, right? Uninteresting characters, for the most part. I really like Lee Jung Jae's Soul, right? He was a really good character. And consistency of story, there just wasn't any, right? I think it suffers from a little bit of both. I really like Manny Jacinto's, I'm already forgetting his name here, Kimir, whatever his name is. And yeah, I mean, there are things to like about the show in my opinion, but it just kind of was missing a bit of both, right? And I'll quickly touch on Andor. I think Andor for me, I'm not going to really include it in this conversation because I acknowledge that Andor, the reason I didn't like Andor as much is just simply personal preference. I just don't think it gravitated towards me, but nothing, like, it had a really consistent storyline, consistent everything. You know, it was a very deliberate move to make, you know, every 3 episodes one story arc rather, and stuff like that. And the characters were really interesting stuff. So I just think Andor, for me, I like Andor a lot. It's just not quite up there. So for those of you who have been, you know, following along with the segment, I think you're going to be able to tell what my 2 big buckets are. What are the 2 things that I think Skeleton Crew did incredibly well that these other shows just weren't able to capitalize on? Number 1, characters. And this is, to me, right? To me, good characters in television, more so than movies. If your television show has characters that you want to watch, you want to be with, you want to spend your time with, you can get away with almost anything. And at the very least, your leash is a lot longer, because that's the reason sitcoms and serialized television television shows with 25 episode seasons and whatnot can get away with decline in quality because Friends gets worse towards the end, and yes, The Office gets worse towards the end, and Parks and Rec is maybe not as strong. Well, Parks and Rec is pretty solid throughout, but The West Wing gets a little bit worse at the end. But the reason you're still sticking with the show is because the characters they're there, and you feel like you're there, and you feel like you're connected to them, and you could just, it's valuable to you in and of itself to spend time with them. That's what Skeleton Crew did right. Wim, Fern, KB, Neil, even watching what Jod was up to, Smee. I enjoyed spending time with these characters. That even if an episode was slower, if the characters were at the forefront of those episodes, and this goes to filler, right? I think episode 6 was a little bit fillerish, where they're still stuck on the planet and they escape the giant crab monster and whatever. But you know what the episode did? Was it focused on the characters. It had that quiet moment between Wim and KB that was awesome. It was beautiful. Is episode 6 my favorite favorite episode of the show? No, absolutely not. Probably one of the weaker ones. But that doesn't matter, because to me, what the show did then was say, okay, we understand maybe the plot's not moving forward as much, but let's leverage our characters now. And I think that is, at a certain point, maybe episode 3 or 4, I was like, doesn't matter now. They can be doing crazy things. I'm here for the characters. I'm here to watch the characters because I think that they're awesome, and I'm rooting for them. And that's what leads to moments at the end of the show. Spoilers for I should have said that up front. Spoilers for the for Skeleton Crew. But when Smee gets decapitated, right, or when Jod is threatening Fern and her mom, I'm like on the edge of my seat, going, what's gonna happen? Don't do that, Jod. Don't do that. And for other shows where you're just not as invested, I'll give Creature Commandos, which is another it was concurrently running with Skeleton Crew, as another show where I'm just like, yeah, whatever, I'm just kind of watching and analyzing it more, as film criticism, whatever that even means, and, from my perspective. But, just kind of watching and going, yeah, things are happening, and, we'll take notes on it, and we'll talk about it, because it just I wasn't on board with the characters as much. So number one is characters, right? It's a huge thing. I would say this is like 75% of it. But the other part of it that you guys probably will be able to tell by now is consistency of story. Because to me, sure, good characters. But if your story is just going all over the place and you have random subplots and you have tons of filler episodes and whatnot, the leash is longer. But you can only get away with so much. What I loved, though, is that the show had a consistency of vision where John Watts was at the helm and he was like, I got this. There is a story going on here. It's a very simple story at its core about a group of kids getting home, but you have complex characters like Jod. What is Jod? Is he a villain? Is he a Jedi? Is he a Sith? No, he's a corrupted Padawan who is just greedy, right? And so you have characters with motivations. You have the kids just wanting to go home and looking for adventure. And really, this story remained at the core of the show the entire time. I mean, sure, at some points, it is side questing a little bit, for sure. You're going on different planets and stuff like that. But again, you tie that back with the other component of the characters, and you tie this back with the consistency of, we need to get home, and there's something weird about At-Aten, right? And you're learning little things about At-Aten every single episode. Like, I think in episode 5, or episode 4, where they get to the top of the tower. I think episode 4, when Smee is starting to attack them, and they start learning, there's a whole system of Old Republic planets and stuff like that. And then the Mint, learning about the Mint and Tag Rennet and things like that. You're learning about the overarching story every single episode. It's not like, hey kids, like, go get this engine part so that you can get off this planet. Not really, right? Usually not so much. And I think that really contributes to what makes Skeleton Crew so special. So again, to me, I think for all the other previous live action Star Wars shows except for Andor, which Andor I admit is more of a personal preference, that I like it, but I don't love it. I think that they were all missing either one of character, good characters or characters that endear themselves to you, or consistent storytelling, consistent story, consistent plot, which I hope by explaining what these two things mean to me, that they don't just kind of feel like random vague categories or words or whatnot. But I think that the previous shows were missing one or the other rather, or both. And I think that, I hope that these Star Wars shows can learn from Skeleton Crew, because I think Ahsoka, for example, Ahsoka Season 2, which is, I think after Andor, is probably going to be the next Disney Plus show that's coming out from Star Wars, maybe early 2026. I hope Ahsoka can learn from this, because it has all the potential to be that if Ahsoka can tell a very streamlined story and focuses on the relationships between Ahsoka and Anakin, Force Ghost, whatever, Ahsoka and Sabine, even Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, whatever that might look like. We talked about the rumor that Obi-Wan's going to be in the show, and then the conflict between Ahsoka and Thrawn and the rebels and Thrawn, or the whatever they're called, not rebels at this point. But I think that Ahsoka has the potential to be a very solid show as well. So we'll see. But I wanted to take some time here just to talk about Skeleton Crew, because I think Skeleton Crew, there are a lot of good lessons that can be learned from a show that was as good as this. But what do you think about this, guys? Did you love Skeleton Crew, and what were the reasons that you really enjoyed Skeleton Crew? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, let's have some fun here. Let's play a little game that I'm calling, which, it's not original to me, but calling buy or sell. This is something that, people do sometimes. I've seen videos with other kinds of content where they, look at rumors for things, mostly sports. I've been looking at it for sports and baseball and whatnot. And, buy or sell some rumors for off-season moves and whatnot. So I thought, we did a segment like this a while ago, maybe in October or November, where we just looked at some MCU rumors and said, hey, what's going on? Do I think it's going to happen? And do I think there's a likelihood of it happening? And I think at the time, I could be wrong, but I think at the time, what I just did was I maybe rated it or gave it a percentage of how likely I thought it was going to happen. But today, let's just make it more simple. I know usually I like to say that things have a lot of nuance and people like to put things in absolutes, but today let's just put things in absolutes. Buy or sell. I have a list here of some rumors going around for the MCU. These are things that I don't generally like to cover as individual segments on my YouTube channel because they're coming from scoopers, they're coming from leakers, and coming from sources that I just can't take to the bank, truthfully. And so because of that, I just kind of keep them in the back of my mind and, just say it could be fun if they happen. And then when it's time to do a segment like this, let's pull them out and just talk about them, have some fun, right? So I'm going to go through some rumors that I've been collecting or just thinking about, and we'll talk about how likely I think they are to happen, buy or sell. So, and if you guys want me to do this segment more often, then feel free to drop that in the comments, let me know. And then also on top of that, just feel free to put some rumors in the comments or just things that you've heard, and we'll see. We might be able to do another one, maybe every month or whatnot. And also just to address the fact, why is it just MCU? Because Star Wars is dead. Star Wars, nothing is happening. And if there's a rumor, maybe we'll talk about it in its own segment because literally nothing's happening. And for the DCU, if and when the DCU really gets up and running, because right now they're sort of in their pre-production phase. I know Creature Commandos just came out, but they haven't even released a full-length movie. They haven't released anything live action. So once that gets up and running, I'm sure we'll be able to do these segments with the DCU as well. Okay, I have talked long enough. Let's get into these rumors. This first one up here is actually something that's been around for a while, but I've just seen it popping up more often these days, and it is that Hulk is going to show up in Captain America Brave New World, the Mark Ruffalo version of Hulk. And in this question, there's no trick question or anything like that. I am counting, Bruce Banner, anything Mark Ruffalo or 616 adjacent Bruce Banner, Smart Hulk, Angry Hulk, doesn't matter. Hulk is going to show up in Captain America Brave New World. And also the reason is that because Captain America Brave New World is coming out soon, so I just wanted to throw in a Captain America 4 rumor here. Okay, so does it make sense for Bruce Banner to show up? Theoretically, actually, yeah, it kind of does, because if you think about it, the entire cast, minus Tim Roth, although Tim Roth, maybe the Abomination shows up in Captain America 4, basically the entire cast of the original Incredible Hulk is showing up in Captain America Brave New World, minus Hulk. Liv Tyler, unless her role got completely cut, based on reshoots and whatnot, but Liv Tyler at a certain point was going to show up, and we'll see if she still does. I think Harrison Ford recently mentioned in an interview that he, his character was motivated a lot by his daughter, so it seems like she's going to show up still. Obviously, Harrison Ford playing Thunderbolt Ross, taking up the mantle from the late William Hurt, and then of course Tim Blake Nelson playing the leader, playing Samuel Stearns from The Incredible Hulk. So, on one hand, does it make sense for Bruce Banner to show up? Sure. I don't think if he does show up, it's going to be, Sam's on the ground in the final fight and his wings are broken and his shield is about to be torn in half by Red Hulk or by the leader or whatever. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you hear a roar and, Angry Hulk's going to come in and save the day. I don't think that's going to happen. Do I believe that maybe, here's what I would posit. And I think, this is much more likely than anything else. I think, once Sam kind of realizes what's going on here, like, oh, there's a Hulk plot going on. Maybe he finds out about Samuel Stearns and does some research on it. Maybe towards the end of the second act, maybe he gives Bruce a call. Because last time we saw Bruce, he was in LA, I guess, just hanging out with his son. goodness, his son, Scar. And so, maybe Bruce is just kind of not close to DC or wherever they are, and he's not going to show up in time, to help the final fight. That's a very easy explanation for why doesn't Hulk himself show up. But, maybe Sam does some research and he's like, hey, wait, all these people were connected to you. How do I stop, Leader? How do I fix the Red Hulk? Or how do I get him under control? And he calls Bruce Banner, and it's sort of a little hologram call, video call kind of thing. And he's just talking to Bruce. I can really see that. So buy or sell, Bruce Banner or the Hulk or Smart Hulk or whatever shows up in Captain America Brave New World. I'm going to buy it. I don't think it's for more than 5 minutes. I really don't. And I don't think it's him fighting in any form, Smart Hulk or otherwise. But I do think that Mark Ruffalo showing up here actually makes a lot of sense, if for no other reason than a lot of the cast of The Incredible Hulk is there, and it seems like a very Hulk-centric plot. So I will buy that rumor. Okay, number 2 is Shang-Chi 2 and Doctor Strange 3 are going to start filming in 2026. Now, we have, gotten confirmation that Doctor Strange 3 is in development, rather, and we've thought, for a while that Shang-Chi 2 is in development, although is that movie ever going to come out? Even before Doomsday, or Kang Dynasty turned into Doomsday with all the Jonathan Majors stuff, Shang-Chi 2 was just kind of dead in the water. Nothing was being talked about it. And so, Simu Liu has come out in interviews and he's been like, yeah, no, it's still happening and whatnot. And, Benedict Cumberbatch just did an interview we'll talk about later on in the podcast where he's like, yeah, we're developing Doctor Strange 3. They have ideas and they want me to pitch ideas. So it seems like both of those films are going to happen. But then, the rumor that's been going around is that both of these films are going to film in 2026. Now, it's interesting because on the one hand, I definitely buy either one of these films filming in 2026. But the question here, the reason that I'm making it a little bit harder on myself is both of these films. Are both of these films going to film in 2026? And if you think about that, what that means is that these films then would be slated for either an early, mid-2027 release or a late 2027, early 2028 release. And I'm going to buy this too. I'm not going to just buy every single thing that's going on here. I'll talk about some rumors that I think are maybe a little more questionable. But this one I also am going to buy. I think that these two films, along with Black Panther 3, right? Because if we're going to get back to the idea of let's kind of have 3 to 4 films a year and that kind of deal. And also, I think, if we're going to do Mutant Saga stuff, great. Have a couple mutant films at the beginning. But we should also, I think, be more cognizant of the fact that we should just let's focus on returning characters as well. I think, Phase 4, we forget Phase 4 focused on a lot of returning characters to start with. WandaVision, Falcon Winter Soldier, Loki, Hawkeye, Black Widow, and then we have Shang-Chi and Eternals, which I really like both of those films. I know liking Eternals is kind of controversial. I really like those films. We had Spider-Man. So, starting out the Mutant Saga with familiar characters, I think is a good idea, honestly. And then you can sprinkle in an X-Men film here or there, or a mutant film, or whatever, X-Force film. Doesn't matter. So I actually think, if the plan is to start out Phase 7, if that's really what they're going to do, Phase 7 with, Shang-Chi 2, Black Panther 3, and Doctor Strange 3, then yeah, I actually totally buy Doctor Strange 3 and Shang-Chi 2 filming in 2026. I think that's fairly likely. So I'm going to buy that rumor as well. The third rumor is that a Strange Academy series is going to be developed, and it's going to probably be the one that comes after the Vision series. That's not part of the rumor necessarily. I'm just, pointing out that if we're going to do Strange Academy, if it's in development, then it's going to come after the Vision series, most likely. I also am going to buy this rumor. Now, a Strange Academy show in itself is not particularly interesting until you start to think about this could be a very interesting show where you bring in a lot of MCU characters, right? And not just for the sake of cameos, but actually, establish the world, right? Get the mystic arts back up and running. And I think this would be an interesting show. I buy this for no other reason, just that it makes sense, and I have no other reason to believe it doesn't. So, Strange Academy would be a fun show, by the way, if Wong was in the lead. That's the other part of the rumor, which, sure, yeah, because I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch would be headlining a Disney Plus series. I just don't at this point. I think he's more preoccupied with, and he's having a lot of fun, doing Avengers films and Doctor Strange films. But to then ask him to do a TV show and then, a special presentation and then an animated show, which he's already doing. He's doing What If, so I don't know. I think it'd be a bit much to ask Benedict Cumberbatch because he also in between these films does Oscar films, and it's he's great in them. So I buy the Strange Academy rumor. The next one up, Spider-Man 4 is being reworked right now, script issues, and it's being reworked to include characters like Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Men. Okay, I am going to sell this rumor. This is going to be the first one I sell, and here's the thing. Do I think there's, a possibility that there are script issues and things going on? Sure, for sure. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. What I don't buy though is the fact that Marvel Studios, because Marvel Studios, while Sony is in control of the production, the more logistical stuff and distributing the film and whatnot, Marvel Studios is the one who's creatively in the driver's seat. Yes, of course, Amy Pascal has control and some say and whatnot, but Kevin Feige is really, like, if Kevin Feige says no, then I don't think the movie happens, right? And to see Kevin Feige be so reactive, because the rumors seem to indicate it's going back and forth and back and forth. It was going to be grounded, now it's multiverse and grounded and multiverse. And to see, to think that Kevin Feige is just that reactive, because there's being reactive when something like a Jonathan Majors scandal happens. That is justifiably being reactive, because you would have never planned for something like that. On the other hand, there's being reactive like the DCEU, where they were just changing their minds every single second. And Kevin Feige just isn't like that, And so I'm going to sell this. Now, does that mean that I think Tobey and Andrew are not going to appear in Spider-Man 4? No. But if they are, I have a feeling that it was just going to be the plan all along. Also, Tom Holland was like, hey, we have a great idea for the script. He was reading script pages and stuff like that. And they're just going to go back to the drawing board now after Tom Holland agreed to do Spider-Man 4 because he really liked the script or he liked the idea of the story. I don't know, guys. To think that it was once going to be a Spider-Man Daredevil movie and then all of a sudden they're like, no, Venom, Tobey, Andrew, is crazy to me. I don't buy it. So, going to sell this rumor. Next one up, second to last one. Captain America is going to return in Doomsday. That's true, or at least confirmed by reports, as Nomad. And Peggy Carter is going to return not as Captain Carter, the multiverse variant, I guess, or version of Peggy that's more like Captain America, but rather as Agent Carter. I am also going to sell this, actually. I think it's more likely that Peggy returns as Agent Carter. I think that Steve, while he may not return as the Steve Rogers, Chris Evans may not return as the Steve Rogers of Earth 616, I think he will return as some version of either Captain America or Captain Hydra. I would buy this more as, Chris Evans is coming back, but to play, there are these rumors going around. I guess we can fold that rumor into here as well, that, Doomsday is going to be evil versions of these characters in the multiverse, maybe even evil versions of the original 6 Avengers, right, in the multiverse. And for that, I think that that's more likely. Nomad, it feels a little weird. Maybe, they call him, or they don't call him Nomad, and he basically is Nomad. Like, he's just sort of a weird wandering version of Captain America. Even then, I don't know if I buy that. You bring Chris Evans back to do something like that. I don't know. So I don't buy that. Peggy being Agent Carter, again, I think there's a decent chance that happens, but I also think that just because of the multiverse, because of What If, because of Doctor Strange 2, it's more likely to me that she comes back as some version of Captain Carter. That's just me, though. Speaking of this, actually, we're going to pull an audible here, because I just remembered another rumor that I was thinking about related to all this. So let's do another one before we do our final one. The other one that I heard recently, Scarlett Johansson is going to come back for Doomsday as Black Widow. Or, who knows, maybe not as Black Widow, but Scarlett Johansson is going to come back for Doomsday. I am going to very tentatively buy that, actually. Because I think if we have Chris Evans coming back, and I'm going to assume Chris Hemsworth and Mark Ruffalo are going to come back, although, who knows, because Benedict Cumberbatch isn't coming back until Secret Wars, but I'm going to assume Chris Hemsworth and Mark Ruffalo is going to come back. Jeremy Renner can do whatever the heck he wants, because he is a literal superhero, and if he just, if it's too demanding or whatnot, he insists that it's, he's in great shape, and I believe him, so we'll see. But Jeremy Renner, whatever the man wants to do, he can do. So, he might come back, but is Black Widow going to come back? Or is Scarlett Johansson going to come back? And if Chris Evans is going to come back, I have to believe Scarlett Johansson's going to come back. So I'm going to buy that rumor as well. The final rumor is related to the Nova series, and it is that Annihilus, a villain that was rumored for a while, actually, for a long time. For those of you who don't remember, pre-Infinity War, there were a lot of rumors about Annihilus coming out. This was like almost 10 years ago at this point. Actually, yeah, just about 10 years ago, that people were thinking Annihilus for Infinity War, and for the Infinity War Part 2 or the Untitled Fourth Avengers film. People were like, is it Annihilation? Avengers Annihilation? Is he going to be the villain of it? And it turns out it was just Thanos again. But Annihilus is going to appear in Nova, and he's going to be set up for future MCU projects. I buy it. I think, Annihilus is a very big villain from what I understand in the comic books. And I think that it makes some sense, actually, that he would show up in Nova, and then, if they want to set him up for some kind of, Avengers conflict. Because I do think that even if we do a Mutant Saga, there's still going to be Avengers projects. So, and maybe we'll be building up to Avengers versus X-Men. But in the meantime, I think there will be Avengers films and X-Men films going on at the same time. I would be, pretty shocked if that wasn't the case. And so I think Annihilus, yeah, sure, he'd be an interesting, villain to face, especially if the Fantastic Four continue on, and, we have some mutants going on, and Nova. So, yeah, I'm going to buy that rumor. So, those were some of the latest rumors I've heard. If you have others that you've heard that you are interested in me hearing my thoughts on that, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to either respond to them if there aren't that many in the comments, or we can do another segment in the future. Totally happy to do both, guys. Let me know if you enjoyed the segment, and yeah, let me know in the comments what you thought. Alrighty, guys, so we are fast approaching the release of the first DCU movie. I know that the DCU officially, kicked off with Creature Commandos, but I mean, come on, let's face it. The real kickoff to the DCU is coming July 11th, 2025, and it is Superman. Now, while that's all been going on, right? While Superman has been, pushing its marketing campaign, and while it's been getting going, and trailers are coming out, and allegedly something at the Super Bowl is going to come, or the Puppy Bowl, I guess, according to James Gunn. But as Superman's getting going, and they're going to start Lantern soon, and, Brave and the Bold is in limbo for some reason, and Bane and Deathstroke. But there's another movie that's actually very quietly started production, and that is the next movie in the DCU. So we got Superman, and then, in terms of TV shows, I think we have Peacemaker, and James Gunn said Lanterns would be coming out in 2026, around the same time as the second movie, Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. We've talked a little bit about some of the casting announcements, including Matthias, and I'm always mispronounce these names, Schoenaerts as Krem of the Yellow Hills, and Jason Momoa being cast as Lobo. And now a Deadline article a Hollywood Reporter article, but again, same kind of caliber of reliability. Hollywood Reporter article has given us 3 interesting nuggets here. The headliner is, the obvious headliner is that Supergirl will be appearing in Superman, which honestly I feel like is an obvious one, but we'll talk about that at the end. But the other two, actually one is the actual headline of the article, which is that the parents of Supergirl have been cast with David Krumholtz, David Krumholtz and Emily Beecham are going to be playing Supergirl's parents, and that is the actual headline. And then hidden within the article is that, big headline, of course, that Supergirl will be appearing in Superman. But then there's actually a third little nugget here, and we'll discuss this, we'll discuss this second, I think. We'll discuss this second to kind of think about, is this actually, do we take this literally, or is this more of just something that was thrown in there? And, because usually the people who write these articles are very careful with their language. But there was a little nugget in this article that says Jason Momoa's role in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is going to be a cameo. So we'll talk about that. But first, let's go in order of first the parents being cast, and then we'll talk about Lobo, and then we'll finally, of course, talk about the big one, that Supergirl is confirmed, at least according to the Hollywood Reporter, to be coming in Superman. So, first of all, like I said, David Krumholtz and Emily Beecham are going to be playing Supergirl's parents. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the comic that Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is based off of, and I myself have not read it, but I do know some of the plot details, and the parents are pretty important characters. I think that, I'm not spoil anything if you don't want to know anything, but the inciting incidents revolve around the family, and we kind of go from there. So these are pretty important characters, though how big of a role they're going to play, I wouldn't say super big. But, I think with the production beginning now and with filming starting just recently, I think it makes sense that all these casting announcements are starting to come about. So it totally makes sense, that we have our parents of Supergirl, David Krumholtz and Emily Beecham. So that is the first thing. That is, of course, the obvious headline. Well, that is the headline of this Hollywood Reporter article. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow adds David Krumholtz, Emily Beecham exclusive. Okay. So the second thing, though, that I wanted to talk about is a little nugget that's hidden kind of halfway through this article here. And I'm just going to read out this paragraph word for word so that there is no ambiguity. So this little paragraph here says, Eve Ridley is on the call sheet as Ruthie. That's what I'm going to say. I don't know how to pronounce that. Well, Matthias Schoenaerts, all these hard to pronounce names on this article. Matthias Schoenaerts is Krem. Jason Momoa is due to cameo as alien bounty hunter Lobo. So that's interesting because as far as I know, Lobo does not have any role in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. Maybe he does, but it's not a big role if it is. And I don't remember hearing any role for Lobo in Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow. So this is one of the deviations that they're going to be making, from the comic books. Because I don't expect that Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, the movie, is going to be a one-to-one adaptation of Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, the comic books. I'm sure they're going to make some adjustments, but it seems like it's going to be largely based on the comic book. But it's interesting because, Jason Momoa as Lobo, it was, there was kind of a big deal, right? I mean, he went on Instagram and he was, shown reading the script and whatnot. And then this article comes out and says he's due to cameo in the film. And that makes me go, interesting. So maybe I had thought originally that he was going to be almost the secondary villain or something like that, or maybe an anti-hero in some sense, maybe eventually teaming up with Supergirl. But it seems like his role in the movie is going to be very limited, which of course, would make you think then he has something bigger, because Jason Momoa, him being Lobo was a big deal, and he had meetings with James Gunn and whatnot. So, one would assume that maybe a Lobo movie is coming, or he's going to be the big villain in something else, or whatever. Maybe the Authority he'll show up in. I don't know. I don't know where else he would fit in the DC slate. By the way, the Authority, dead silent. Nothing's been said about the Authority for a long time. So that was part of the James Gunn original slate. Anyways, so yeah, I think that is an interesting thing here. It remains to be seen how big of a role Jason Momoa has. And again, I said maybe this is just sort of them putting this in here just to say he's not the main villain. But usually the people who write these articles are very careful, because these are scoops, right? And so you want to be as accurate as you possibly can be. So we'll see. We'll see about that. And then the third thing is the, actual big headline, even though the headline of this article, the literal headline, is about the parents. But here, the article confirms Alcock was picked as Supergirl almost a year ago and will first appear in Gunn's Superman movie. So there you go. I mean, I think it's something that either was heavily rumored or sort of implicitly confirmed at some point, but makes sense, right? I mean, there is going to be some interconnectivity. Again, I push back on everyone in the comments who, very well-meaningly, but says, oh no, the DCU is going to be so, separate, and all the projects are going to be, not connected and whatnot. And let's face the reality and say that Creature Commandos literally had a vision of the Justice League and Peacemaker in it. Superman is going to have Green Lanterns that will then show up in Lanterns, and we'll have Supergirl that will show. It's not a good or a bad thing. I just want to point out the fact that, yes, sure, DC is going to take a different approach from Marvel. I've had plenty of videos and discussions with James Gunn's quotes where we talk about those things, and that's great. That's fine. Totally fine. But let's not delude ourselves and say the DCU, each project is going to be completely standalone. There is still going to be a through line. What that through line looks like, I don't know. But anyways, that's what this, to me, this indication of Supergirl is officially going to be in Superman, to set up the next movie. And that's totally fine. That's great. That's what made Marvel successful. And not that DC is copying Marvel, but it's just part of what you do when you have a shared universe. So anyways, those are the three takeaways here from this article. What do you think about this, that Supergirl has cast the parents of Supergirl, and that Jason Momoa might just have a cameo as Lobo, and then of course that Supergirl will be in Superman first? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, so 2025 is well underway, but I wanted to do maybe one last, and who knows, maybe we might come back to this but for now, one last segment looking back at 2024, because, and I waited specifically because we're now about a month into 2025, that we can now finally start to look at the final box office results of 2024. Because yes, there were some films like Mufasa that opened up in December, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, that are now, I think, they'll still make some more money, and we can kind of give them a plus or minus, $5, 10, $15 million, whatever. But I think in general, we're set. We're set for the 2024 box office. And I want to take a look here, because I did my predictions, right? I did my predictions for 2025. You can go check that out on the channel. I think it was episode, I want to say 50, 54, something like that. 55 of the Access Blockbusters pod. But, I think that just, doing those predictions, it's also helpful for me to look back on 2024, just so that maybe, in the future I can be more informed about what is going on, and what we can learn here. So let's take a look here. I have two lists pulled up. I have one, which is the domestic box office results, but I wanted to spend the majority of the time looking at the international grosses, because frankly, that's the more, we talk about billion-dollar films and whatnot. So I want to look at this list here. It's almost, I think every single film that was released, that had a wide release, is on this list. It's something like 200 movies, or maybe just top 200. But, and it even includes, little things like TV releases that were released in movies and things like that. So, it's including everything. But we're obviously going to focus on the upper end of the echelon, upper end of the, scale. It even has Lord of the Rings, a Return of the King re-release, which made $11 million, surprisingly. So that's interesting. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to go through the international results. We're going to start bottom up. So we're going to go from the very bottom. We're going to kind of just scroll through, do a quick readout, and see, are there interesting numbers? And then when we get to the top 15, top 20-ish, we'll start reading out all the numbers. And then I want to give some thoughts. And then with the domestic results, I just want to compare them and basically see, okay, are there films that, maybe didn't perform in the top 10, for example, for international grosses, but really performed well on the domestic results that might give us an insight into the future, maybe for the company, maybe for a sequel, things like that. So let's start out here with the international box office results. We're just going to start out at the bottom. I'm just going to start scrolling, and once we see something that catches our eye, then I will point it out. So the first thing we see, so I just pointed out the Lord of the Rings Return of the King re-release, which is kind of funny that made $11 million, by the way. That's kind of crazy. So we're scrolling through the top 100. Right now we are in sort of the 110 range. Now, this is the first interesting one. The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, internationally, right, only made $19 million. And again, it's interesting, right, because Lord of the Rings as a franchise is one of the most beloved movie franchises in the world. Now, perhaps the part of the reason might be that, the Rings of Power is one of the most divisive, properties, shows, movies to come out in the last little while. But it's still really interesting that a movie with such a tied to such an iconic franchise. And again, there are many, many mitigating factors to this. Like I just said, with Rings of Power being very divisive, but also the fact that it's animated and it's not tied to the main story of the Lord of the Rings. It's animated, not just animated, but it's sort of in the anime style, which again, I know a lot of people love, but also a lot of people are maybe not as interested in it compared to the CGI 3D animation. And so you just look at the numbers, right? Because that's what we're doing here. I mean, I'm going to give some subjective thoughts and some analysis here, but we're looking at objective numbers, and the numbers don't lie. Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim was really, 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 really small in the box office. And I think that I don't know, makes me interested to see what's going to happen with the future Hunt for Gollum films and whatnot, because, yeah, I mean, it has the Lord of the Rings name attached to it, but has the legacy, kind of lost its weight? Or maybe it'll kind of come right back because it's a sort of Peter Jackson produced in the main timeline sort of Lord of the Rings film. I'm not sure. So scrolling up here, the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare came in at $30 million, which I think is surprising to me. That seemed like a movie that was going to have a little bit more appeal, honestly. And so I'm a little bit surprised here that it's so low. Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1 coming in at $38 million. This was one of the biggest disasters in box office just in general, but I mean, this decade, it's one of the most disappointing things because Kevin Costner self-financed the whole thing, and well, it just really, really, really cratered. So that's definitely disappointing here. Paddington in Peru, surprisingly, has $72 million because it came out in Britain, I think, in London a couple months ago. So I think it's up here. It's in the top 50, which is exciting because we're going to get to see Paddington in Peru in just about a month, which I'm very excited for. Kraven the Hunter made $60 million. And by the way, a complete unknown, the Bob Dylan movie, made $58 million. And those two movies drastically different in terms of their quality, I would say, having not even seen Kraven the Hunter. But I can imagine. And they made about the same amount of money. Very interesting. Argyle, one of the bigger disappointments of the year, made $96 million. And Challengers made $96 million as well. So now we head into the top 38 films. And these are all films that made over $100 million worldwide. Now, I said when I did my 2025 box office predictions, I had about 35, and I said, I don't know. I'd have to look at the data, but at the time I was recording, I wasn't able to look at this chart, and I thought, is 35 too much? Is that way too much to expect 35 films to make $100 million? Because that's what I made predictions for, all the films that I thought would make $100 million. But I think it's right around the money, actually. It's right around the target, because this past year, 2024, 38 films made $100 million. Now, granted, a few of these I have no idea. For example, number 38 is a film called Haikyuu, the Dumpster Battle, and I've never heard of this before, and it made $100 million. So there you go. So yeah, there are definitely going to be some films next year that make $100 million that I don't have the remotest idea what they are. And then there are going to be some that obviously drop off at the peripherals. So we have films here at the lower end like Madam Web. Great for Madam Web. Films like, Civil War that came out around April. Furiosa, one of the biggest box office bombs of the year, made $173 million. Transformers 1 made $130 million. That film deserved so much better. I haven't seen Furiosa yet. I'm planning on seeing it soon, but I'm sure Furiosa we'd be able to say the same thing. The Fall Guy made $181 million. So in this range, right, in this bracket here, it's interesting because these films just did not have that same appeal that the other kind of broader appeal that these the top films did. And I wonder if it has something to do with the release date, right? Furiosa and Fall Guy came out in around May of 2024. And there are other films, like we'll talk about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, that it's a little higher up, that did make some money. But I wonder if we're heading towards this trend now of towards the later months of the year, the holiday season being way more lucrative than the earlier months. And Transformers 1, to a lesser extent, came out in August, I want to say, or maybe September. And it just doesn't feel like maybe those months are ripe for box office success. So, I wonder if Furiosa came out in November and Fall Guy came out in December, would those films have done better? I don't know. It's a question that I want to kind of keep an eye on in the future as we head into the holiday season this year. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, $200 million. It seems like, I'm not going to say the franchise is dead. It's one of the most beloved IPs ever. But, this new film didn't do so great. Joker Folie à Deux, $206 million compared to $1 billion for the first one. Yeah, that was a decided box office bomb. We have Garfield. We have A Quiet Place. We're in the top 20 now. Wild Robot made $324 million. And honestly, for a completely unknown animated film, which I know was based on an IP, but people didn't really know about it that much, really good. I think it was really solid. Would I have liked to have made it more money, to have seen it make more money? For sure. But I think $324 million is not anything to sneeze at. Alien Romulus at $350 million, I think, is enough to continue to jumpstart this universe. I think that's really great. It ends with us. I'm not going to go into all the drama. There's plenty of videos online that, do a better job, at least, of explaining what's going on there. But so who knows if the controversies boosted it or anything like that. But it made $350 million. That's kind of impressive. And I was talking about it before. Number 15, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, almost $400 million, which, look, not the most. I saw the film and I liked it a lot. I thought it was really solid, but I would have liked to have seen it make a little bit more money. I think that if it had made closer to $500 million, I would be really excited. We'll see, because that film set up a sequel, and as far as I know, there hasn't been any movement in particular with the sequel to that film. But I would really like to see a sequel to that movie, and we'll see if that one can make more than $400 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 coming in at $422 million. Really, really good for a Sonic film to get close to $1 billion. And then we head to Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice, $450 million. Pretty good. Gladiator 2, $458 million. Again, pretty solid. And now we head into the top 10. So number 10, Venom the Last Dance, coming in at $478 million, which is, I think the least amount of money that any Venom film has made, but still close to $500 million for easily the lowest critically received film. Pretty good, right? Pretty good for Venom. Kung Fu Panda 4, $550 million just about. That's pretty solid, even though it's kind of a franchise that's on its last legs. Godzilla x Kong, $570 million. Honestly, if these films had been a little bit more about the quality, and I think that this sort of concept is getting a little stale, I think that it could have made more money, but, because these Godzilla, Kong films are supposed to be real event films, and $570 million feels a little disappointing to me, but we'll see. Mufasa the Lion King at almost $600 million is pretty impressive, honestly, for a film that nobody really asked for. Wicked had just crossed $700 million. Guys, I just rewatched Wicked again recently. It is perhaps one of the best experiential events I've ever had in a theater. It is amazing. It's so good. I hope it has all the success in the world. Speaking of amazing theatrical experiences, Dune Part 2 at $715 million. I'm sure if and when Dune Messiah comes out, does it have a chance to hit $1 billion? We'll see. I mean, Dune Messiah is an interesting book, so we'll see. But yeah, really, really interesting. And we'll talk about Wicked Part 2 more when we talk about domestic, because I think there's some interesting trends here. Despicable Me 4 at $970 million, so almost at the $1 billion mark, because the three films that did hit $1 billion, Moana at just about $1 billion, Deadpool and Wolverine at $1.3 billion, and Inside Out 2 astoundingly almost like a couple $1 million short of $1.7 billion. So bottom line here, internationally, Disney rules. Disney has ruled the box office. And you have, sure, your top three films have grossed a collective amount of about $4 billion. That is amazing, for your top three films. But then you have smaller wins like Mufasa the Lion King, as well, which is amazing for it. And honestly, yeah, I don't see, so I'm just trying to find the next Disney film. Maybe that's about it that Disney released this year. And honestly, if all of your films can hit like that, because I don't really see any other big Disney movies this year. I think that was it, those four films. Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, Moana 2, and Mufasa the Lion King. Those four films making $4.6 billion is amazing. It shows that Disney is back. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting here is that animated films actually did quite well this year, maybe aside from Transformers 1, which is really disappointing to me because that was a good film. But Inside Out 2, $1.7 billion. Moana 2, $1 billion. Despicable Me 4, it didn't hit $1 billion, but for all intents and purposes, let's say $1 billion. Kung Fu Panda 4, $550 million, Even The Wild Robot we just talked about, $350 million. So I think one of the other lessons to learn here, to take away, is that animation rules. And we talked about with the Andy Muschietti comments a while ago about the whole, he's like, the 4 quadrants and people don't like Flash or whatever. But I think there is something, Flash aside, there's something to be said about this whole idea of 4 quadrant films, right? Because, animation, especially good animation, that's why Inside Out, which appeals to not just kids, honestly, I would argue Inside Out 2 made more for teenagers and adults than kids. I think that's a huge recipe for success. Moana 2 is a family film. It is a true family film. I guess we should include Mufasa the Lion King as animated, but I'm more just, I know it's technically animated. I'm just more talking about the CG animated films. Even things like Kung Fu Panda 4, Despicable Me 4, those are films that the parents could feel okay about, taking the kids to and just kind of shut their eyes or enjoy the hijinks that the minions go through. So I think that is a big lesson to take away, that animation is king. Animation is king. And when we look at upcoming films like Elio, we'll see, because it's a new property. And if you notice, Inside Out 2, Moana 2, Despicable Me 4, Mufasa the Lion King is a prequel, Kung Fu Panda 4, these are all sequels, to be fair. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is some animation in it, so that is true. But, when we're looking at films like Shrek 5, which is coming out in a couple of years, Toy Story 5 is coming out in a little bit, Incredibles 3 in a little bit, never, ever, ever count out those films to make, huge money. Zootopia 2. Easily, I think, could cross $1 billion. I think it's not going to be particularly close, in my opinion. So before we end this segment here, I want to just jump quickly to the domestic box office results as well, just to see, are there any big discrepancies? And there's one in particular that I want to point out, but we'll kind of go through some other ones that, caught my attention. I think one thing that I want to look at here is that, what's the excitement in the US market? Because the US market is the biggest market for these movies. And I think that if the US market is really excited, then I think the international market will catch up eventually, is my thought, especially if there is going to be a sequel or something else coming along in the future. So a couple things that stand out to me right away is that Dune Part 2 actually is relatively low domestically. It's at about $282 million, which is maybe 3/7 of what its international gross was, compared to, right? And this is what I really wanted to talk about. Wicked Part 1 had a domestic gross of $433 million. And that is over 50% of its domestic gross. What's encouraging about that to me is that, because yes, Wicked will have a sequel. It is coming out a year after the first one. It is riding the momentum of the first film, not just in box office and critical reception, but also most likely at the award season, which will be in March. And then you'll have maybe 6 months to kind of build the excitement again for Wicked Part 2. I said in my initial predictions, and I made my predictions for 2025 before Wicked had finished its run, before it even had barely started its run, right? At the time, it had made something like $300 million. And I was like, well, we're just taking a guess here. And I put something crazy, like $1.5 billion. Now, if I had to make my estimates, again, knowing what I know now that Wicked is going to top out at about $720 million, let's say, I would probably shrink it a little bit, but not by much. I still think Wicked Part 2 is going to be $1 billion film, because look, you have this domestic box office gross that I think will only go up, right? And I think the international acclaim and the international box office is only going to catch up to it. I think Wicked Part 2, I'm not going to call it a lock. I'd call it 75% chance it's going to cross $1 billion. And I think that is exciting for it. And we'll have to see. But again, comparing it to a Dune Part 2, when we look at a film like Dune Messiah, if Dune Part 2 is making a lot of its money internationally, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how well Dune Messiah can do, because, again, all the press tours and all these different things are mostly done domestically in the United States. And so I wonder, does Dune Messiah have a kind of a ceiling of like maybe $800 million? Because maybe Dune Messiah, which again is not as well known, it's not coming off the high of a Dune Part 1, and how are we going to complete the story? And it's more just its own thing. And I wonder, people are going to be like, what is this? What's the story going to be? Especially because we kind of closed it out in Dune Part 2. And so I'm wondering, I would not actually bet money whenever Dune Messiah does come out, because again, momentum's going to be lost a little bit with, kind of a 4-year gap between the two films. And also, I just don't know if the appetite is there domestically. Because, again, it's going to get critical acclaim. Denis Villeneuve will be nominated, I'm sure, for Best Director. I hope so. And Dune Part 2 will probably be nominated for Best Picture. But, we'll have to see. And by the way, I should clarify. I say probably because I'm recording this segment right before the nominations come out, which we'll talk about in this episode, as long as they do come out. So, I'm sure we'll find that out eventually, or we'll find that out very soon. But I do think that, comparing Wicked and Dune Part 2, for their sequels, Wicked Part 2 and Dune Messiah, I wonder if Wicked doesn't have a much higher ceiling than that. So guys, those were some lessons, maybe lessons, maybe it's just all nonsense, but I think it was really interesting to take a look back here at 2024 and see what we could gain from the box office films. Let me know in the comments down below, does this change your mind at all about what's going to make the most money in 2025, or do you still think it's going to be the same? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, so we have some news on the James Gunn DCU front, because James Gunn, who is very, very active on social media, has put out a statement basically saying he is in development, and his exact words were pre-writing his next DCU project. Now, that's it. I mean, that's about it for the objective news. And I should say, he didn't specifically say DCU, but one has to assume DCU, but he said DC Studios project. But there's a couple interesting things that I wanted to talk about here, because yeah, I mean, on the surface, that's it. Like James Gunn says, he's writing his next thing. Great. We all move on. We all have a happy life. And on the one hand, this is a good thing, right? Because, well, we haven't seen Superman. Looks great. And let's just assume that Superman comes out and it crushes. He's done 3 Guardians films that have been critically really well received. Peacemaker, season 1, really well received. The Suicide Squad, very much well received. And while I didn't love Creature Commandos, also very well received. I've liked a lot of what James Gunn has done. The Suicide Squad and Peacemaker are 2 of my favorite projects that the DCEU produced. And while, yes, I was disappointed by Creature Commandos, I think that, James Gunn's writing talents are not to be underestimated, ever, in my opinion. So, in a vacuum, sure, it's a good thing. But here's what's interesting about this to me. At what point do we say, James Gunn, you kind of need to take a step back here and realize you're not just the head creative, like you're not just the top billed writer of the DCU, you are the president, the co-president of DC Studios. And, he said this himself, he's had an insane schedule over the last couple of years. That includes writing all of Creature Commandos, writing Superman, writing Peacemaker Season 2, directing Superman, directing some of Creature Commandos, directing some of Peacemaker Season 2, and then on top of that, watching dailies from other projects. Right now, that's Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, reading entire scripts from other people and sending them back with notes, and just, just keeping the ship afloat, right? And at what point do you go, James, I mean, that's great and all, but at what point is it too much, And honestly, I'm not here to answer that question, because the only person who can answer that question is James Gunn. And I get it. James Gunn is a very, very talented writer, and I'm sure he has that itch. As soon as one project's done, he's like, gotta do another one. But he's also the head of a studio. Now, he's not as, busy, I'm sure, as Kevin Feige would be, for example, because Kevin Feige is dealing with the business side, and Kevin Feige is not, creatively involved, but I'm sure he's involved in the story and molding different things with different projects to various degrees. And he has his army of executive producers that he sends out to help with those projects. But the thing about DC is that business part of the universe is given to Peter Safran. But James Gunn, I look at the schedule, and he's talked about it himself. He's like, yep, and in a given year we're writing things, we're shooting things, we're looking at dailies, and I go, where is the time to I get it that the quality control is him in a sense. He's saying, well, yeah, I mean, but we're not going to greenlight projects unless the script is to my liking, and that's great. That's great and all, but I just wonder at what point does it start to become too much for James Gunn? And I'm curious to see what he's writing. The other interesting thing about this too is that at what point does this just start becoming the James Gunn DCU, right? And you think about this: the first 3 projects of the DCU will all be James Gunn. It will be Creature Commandos, and which is confirmed to have a season 2, by the way, so that will also presumably be written by James Gunn. It will be Superman, written and directed by James Gunn, and then it will be Peacemaker season 2, written by James Gunn and directed some by James Gunn as well. And then, you have other projects like Supergirl and Lanterns and whatnot. I wonder, what's the balance here between James Gunn saying, I have to write half these projects because I got to get this under control and this is going to be my vision, which is fine and all. But then what's the delineating line is my question. And I'm not here to say that it's a good or a bad thing. I'm excited to see what James Gunn has to write. I just also am saying, but James Gunn is not like, for example, the Marcus and McFeely of the DCU, who Marcus and McFeely were basically just writing MCU movies from, Winter Soldier on, and they did an amazing job at it. They were the top writers for the DCU. But James Gunn not only is doing that, he's not only the top writer for the DCU right now, because he is, again, Creature Commando Season 1, and presumably he's going to write Season 2, Peacemaker Season 2, and who knows after that, Superman, and now he's writing another project. Not only is he the top writer, but he's also the head of the studio. And so I wonder, guys. I wonder at what point, James Gunn will have to say, hey, this is a lot for me. And, I have to deal with the other parts of the studios, because not to mention that there seem to be some communication problems going on with him and Andy Muschietti, for example. So we'll see. We'll have to see about that. I'm not excited about this. I'm just curious, curious as all. What do you guys think, though? James Gunn is apparently pre-writing his next DC Studios project, presumably in the DCU. Do you think this is a good thing? Do you think this is a bad thing? What do you think it could be? I'm not even here to speculate about that. For example, you might have noticed in the entire segment, I didn't even talk about what it could be. I have no idea what it could be. If James Gunn can pull Creature Commandos and Guardians of the Galaxy out of his hat, no idea what his next project could be. For all we know, it's Creature Commando Season 2, and we're just making much ado about nothing. But let me know in the comments what you think the project could be, and if you're excited about it, in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, so we talked last week in the previous episode of the Access Blockbusters pod about the early box office projections for opening weekend for Captain America Brave New World. And so, just to kind of add on to that picture now, we have some more data that I think is interesting enough to talk about here. But I almost see it in a similar way to what we talked about last week with Captain America Brave New World's box office projections, in that I think you can read whatever narrative you want in this. And I think that really the big determining factors as to whether or not Captain America Brave New World will be a box office success won't be determined until after the film comes out. But we'll talk about it in just a second. So the pre-sale tickets have been live, and I said last week I got my tickets for opening weekend, and they've been live for about a couple weeks as of the release of this podcast. Now we have some data now, and it looks like, according to the data, the film, and I'm reading an article here from a website called Game Rant. I'd never heard of it before, but reading an article here, and they say Captain America Brave New World is lagging, it's ahead of films such as Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels, which is good. That's a good thing. It's also ahead of Joker Folie à Deux, which is an interesting comparison, other than just being in the conversation for comic book movies. And it is lagging behind obviously bigger films like Deadpool and Wolverine. It's also ahead of other MCU films such as Eternals and Black Widow. Although, caveat there, those two films were coming out right at the tail end of the big first wave of the pandemic, so I don't know. Is that the most reasonable comparison? Maybe, maybe not. And it's also ahead of a film like Dune Part 2. Maybe a little more relevant, right? I mean, sure, it's not the exact same demographic. Like, the Venn diagram there is not, a complete circle, but it's there's a bit of overlap. And Dune Part 2 made $714 million. So it's interesting, right? Because, again, I think we can read a lot of things into these pre-ticket sales, but here's the thing. Right? Because, yeah, sure. So we can look at it and say, okay, so there isn't as much excitement for Captain America Brave New World as there is with Deadpool and Wolverine, but maybe there's a little more excitement here than, compared to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels. To which I say, yeah, isn't that kind of obvious? I think if this film, all things being equal, like, let's say these films were coming out at the peak of the MCU, I still think, like, let's just say the year is 2017. And the three films coming out that year are Captain America Brave New World, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, and the Marvels. Given, how, let's just take the peak of the MCU, like coming off of Civil War, Doctor Strange, Spider-Man Homecoming, etc. I don't think it's a surprise to say that Captain America Brave New World is outpacing those films, right? I think that makes sense. The other films that they're listing here, like it's outpacing Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which, again, another pandemic film. Like, of course, it's going to outpace every single pandemic film in 2021, other than Spider-Man No Way Home, because that was just a behemoth, right? And it's outpacing Captain America: The First Avenger and Thor, which, again, those are Phase 1 movies that didn't make a whole lot of money comparatively, although they made some money, right? I think in the range of $300 to $500 million is somewhere where those two films landed, right? But again, I think the bottom line is this, and this article also cites the fact that Captain America Brave New World will be boosted for sure by the President's Day weekend. And actually, it's a pretty strategic window for them as well, because not only is it President's Day weekend, which means that the Monday will be off for most people working in at school, which is a big plus, but also the Friday that it comes out is Valentine's Day. And, I don't know how many couples are going out there. I'm sure there are statistics and data that will tell you an exact answer, or at least give an approximation about how many couples going to go to the movies for their date night or whatever. I can't imagine it's a whole lot of people, to be honest, because, I mean, watching a movie is a very quiet event for, for people. I'm not here to discuss, the psychology of what couples do on Valentine's Day, but all to say, it's not zero, right? I'm sure that there are couples who are very excited and they're going to use that chance to celebrate and go watch a movie. And if the movie's Captain America Brave New World, great. It's also, though, opening against Paddington in Peru, which I don't think will be nearly as big as Captain America Brave New World, obviously. But, Paddington in Peru might be a more fun, cutesy kind of movie that might appeal to people more. So who knows? Who knows? But it can't hurt. I certainly don't think it can hurt. Here's what it comes down to, though, in my mind. And this is such a Captain Obvious thing to say, but I'm going to say it because I genuinely do believe this. All of this stuff, all of these, the talks about momentum and whatnot, because sure, Captain America Brave New World certainly seems like it has a ceiling, right? It's not going to make as much money as a Deadpool film, coming off of 2 incredibly successful Deadpool films, and coming off of Hugh Jackman returning as Wolverine and coming into the MCU. It doesn't have the ceiling that Deadpool and Wolverine does. It doesn't have the ceiling that, Avengers Doomsday does. Even if the MCU is not in a good state or whatever, an Avengers film has a much higher ceiling than any Captain America film does. Maybe except for Captain America Civil War, for example. But it comes down to this. It comes down to, is the film good? And I know that is such an obvious thing to say, right? Because duh, if a film is good, then a film is good and it's probably going to make more money. Not always the case, though. And I think that with a film like this, that's unproven, right? Because, well, I think that there are some people in pockets of the internet and pockets of, the world that are like, no, I'm never going to see a movie, with another person as Captain America. Some more malicious than others, right? Some just can't stand the idea of a black man as Captain America, and obviously that's a much more, malicious and harmful way to look at it. But also, I think there are just people out there who are just like, yeah, well, Steve Rogers is Captain America to me, and I'm just not going to watch this movie. Again, I think that is, obviously the first, the former opinion is crazy and it's hateful and it's wrong. But the second one, I think everyone should give the movie a chance, right? If they're willing to watch a Captain America film. I understand that, it's hard to unsee Steve Rogers as Captain America. So there is that. And so, honestly, if the film is received well, because there are unknowns, Sam Wilson being Captain America, MCU kind of being at a precarious point, Red Hulk, what's that all about? But if the movie is good, and if people are generally saying, like, I'm not even saying 95% Rotten Tomatoes, I'm like 75, 80%, and people are like, hey, this is back to Marvel, it's fun, it's really fun, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking or anything like that, I think people will go. I think if the word of mouth is, this is definitely something, if you have a weekend free, go check it out, it's fun, then I think people will go, right? If the word of mouth is, it's okay, I think the film is not. I honestly, if that is the word of mouth, I think the film's not going to do well at all. I think if it's like 50 to 60%, even, I think people are just going to be like, yeah, Marvel, not as great as it used to be, and people are just not going to go. But I think that if the film comes out swinging, right, and it, again, by swinging, I don't mean perfect. I'm not saying it has to be Paddington 1 and 2 levels of Rotten Tomato scores and Metacritic scores and cinema scores and whatnot. I'm just saying if the film removes the review embargo and everyone's like, really good time, I think people are going to go. The 4-day weekend, the MCU factor, I think people are curious. I think people will go. And I think that this is a film that stands to honestly have longer legs than most other MCU films just based on the word of mouth. So we'll see about that. I think the pre-sale tickets, yeah, it's an interesting insight, sure. And it's landing it in the same place as the early box office opening weekend projections were as well. But I think, again, I'm more curious about, we're going to definitely cover this in the next couple weeks if it's not the same week as the film coming out itself, because that would be kind of redundant. I'll try to do my review then. But if the review embargo lives, at least a week before the film comes out, then we'll definitely cover that on the channel, because that's what I'm most curious about, is what are the reviews saying, what are the reactions. But we'll talk about that when that happens. Guys, what do you think about the pre-sale tickets? It's fine. It's kind of in that same range of, better than most Phase 1 films and kind of, better than most in fact, almost all of the pandemic films that the MCU did, but still kind of lagging behind the big event films. Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, so when they first announced Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, the animated MCU, or, well, MCU, Marvel Studios series at the very least, I was actually quite excited, because I was saying, oh, what a great opportunity. You don't have to tell the origin story of Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the actual movies, because it seems like, we're just kind of getting past that. But, just as an animated series, it would be really fun to see the backstory of that version of Peter Parker. Then more details started to come out about the series, and it was revealed that series was actually not Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Instead, it was some other multiversal variant of Spider-Man, and there were going to be all sorts of interesting things. So first of all, Iron Man was not going to be his initial mentor. It was going to be Norman Osborn, voiced by Coleman Domingo, Oscar-nominated Coleman Domingo, amazing actor. And then there were going to be characters like Daredevil and Kingpin showing up, and all these other different comic book characters, and his, cast of friends was going to be different. So as more details started to come out, I became less and less interested in it, because then my mind went to the fact of, okay, so then we're just doing another animated Spider-Man series, which is fine, it's great. And my question is really, with the amount of output that Marvel Animation has going for it with What If, which I maintain just got worse and worse and worse and worse as all the seasons went on. And I didn't even like the first season that much, so it wasn't even starting out at a very high place. Marvel Zombies, why? What are we doing here? Marvel Zombies, really? Okay. And then Eyes of Wakanda could be interesting, but again, I don't know. We'll see. And so really just with the amount of output that was going on here, my thought was, why don't we, we could just coalesce all of these resources into making one really spectacular MCU animated film, whether it takes place in Wakanda or it is a Spider-Man origin film, whatever, just quality, right? Quality over quantity. So then the first trailer for Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man came out about a month ago, and I did a segment on that episode, that week's episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, where I talked about, I said, look, I don't know. I watched the trailer, didn't look that good to me. I enjoyed X-Men 97, to be fair, but I didn't love it as much as everyone else did. And I don't know what Marvel Animation is doing. Again, quality, over quantity, in my opinion, especially here, because we've been saying that for a while for the live action stuff in the MCU, but it just didn't make sense to me. But again, I always say this too on the channel. I go into every single thing, movie, TV, whatever, with an open mind, right? Doesn't matter what the critic reactions are. If I'm going to go see it, I'm going to try to get as much enjoyment out of it as I can, while still being, critical in the sense of I'm not going to lie to myself and say, oh, I love this film, even if I, actually hate it. So that all being said, the first critic reactions for Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man are out. And actually the series is coming out pretty soon. It's coming out in about a week, and they're really good. Now, to preface all that, or to preface these reactions, because we're going to look through some of them and then see what, some of the critical consensus seems to be. But just to say, generally speaking, unless your film is really bad, like really, really, really bad, in which case the studios don't even lift the embargo until right before anyway, so you don't even hear about these. But generally speaking, critical reactions are positive. Like the initial reactions, right? The very, very first reactions are generally positive. So it's kind of a thing where you'd rather be in the situation where, yes, like of course you'd want the first critic reactions to be positive, because that increases the likelihood that people, actually are going to really like the show, but it doesn't always guarantee that. So I want to just give that caveat right up front, just to say that it doesn't mean that Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is going to be amazing, and by amazing, I just mean critically, right? It doesn't mean that everyone's going to love it. But again, you'd rather be in this situation than not. So let me just go through these. I have an article pulled up from The Direct, and we're just going to read through some of the comments here from the critics and see what people are saying. So this first one up, and I'm not going to really read through who said what. I'm just going to read through some of the comments and see if we can pull some threads. So Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, this is the first one. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is so good, extremely fun and action-packed with great character work. It quickly carves out its own space in a very crowded landscape of Spidey cartoons. Okay, Marvel has outdone itself, adding real substance to a very stylish show. Loved it. Very positive. Okay, next one up. I can happily say that Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is super good. From the first episode, I was on the edge of my seat. That's interesting, because this show doesn't seem like it's one where you'd be on the edge of your seat. It seems like it could, at the very best, be fun and entertaining, but tense and tension-filled. Interesting. Okay, continuing on. I love the animation, the top-tier voice acting, and the fantastic action throughout all 10 episodes. That's another very encouraging thing, actually, about these critical reactions, is that it seems like these critics, got all 10 episodes. And so that's good, right? Because, we've seen it before. For example, She-Hulk, you get the first 3 episodes and people like it. I like the first 3 episodes of She-Hulk, generally. And I don't hate the show as much as most people did, but it seems like for most people, and myself included, there was a drop-off after that. So even Moon Knight, for example. Moon Knight, I think the first couple episodes were amazing. And then the show kind of tailed off from there. So it's good to see that these critics got the, the full length of the show. So let's see. The next reaction here is praising Coleman Domingo. This part is dedicated to the incomparable Coleman Domingo. No stranger to voice acting. Domingo's performance as Norman Osborn in Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is outstanding. 10, 10, 10 across the board. Again, what else could you expect from an amazing actor like Coleman Domingo? Next reaction, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man features some snappy comic book inspired animation. It's great to hear. A banger opening theme. Nice. And some top-notch voice acting. While I feel like Spidey navigating high school is getting redundant, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man thankfully offers just enough to keep the story fresh. So this is one that's, has some positive things to say, but it may be a little bit more lukewarm here than compared to other ones. This next one here, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is really a really good Spidey story. This take on Peter Parker is authentic and a great combination of comic book and MCU lore. Ending eps are awesome. It doesn't reach the depths of X-Men 97, but it's one of Marvel Animation's better entries for sure. In my opinion, that's not a super high bar, but it's good. Good to hear. Next one, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is going to be a hit with Marvel, especially Marvel Comics fans. There is so much packed in from fan favorite characters to Easter eggs from issues. A perfect show for families, not too kiddie, not too adult. Okay, that gives you a sense of the tone. I also wonder, by the way, just, in comparison to, because you can't help but make these comparisons to something like Across the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse, those Spider-Verse films, how it compares, because it seems like people are saying similar things of really comic accurate and fun animations and a cool style and a great take on Peter Parker and whatnot. So I'm curious to see, if there are any parallels running between those two properties. Next reaction up, Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is spectacular. Nice reference to Spectacular Spider-Man. Anyways, all 10 episodes deliver an electrifying web-slinging adventure with a fresh art style and amazing voice acting. It brings some of the best Spider-Man stories to life. Every episode packs enough surprises to keep you hooked. Okay, good. That's good. I'm just going to read a couple more here. This person says, I watched Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and loved it, all caps, loved. The animation feels like classic Lee/Ditko comics, and Hudson Thames, I don't know, is perfect as Spidey. I love the heartfelt, down-to-earth moments. He's really protecting the neighborhood. That's fun. I like that, kind of aspect as well. Let's read maybe how many more in this article. There's three. There's three more. So let's read all three of them, and then we'll be done with the reactions, and I'll give some thoughts. So, I watched all 10 episodes of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and had a blast with it. It feels nostalgic of the classic 90s animated series I grew up on while using the multiverse to bring fresh visions and perspective to a fan favorite character. Okay, great. Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, next one, is an absolute thrill ride. The animation is incredible and storylines are unexpected and the action sequences are amazing. I've seen all 10 episodes and I can proudly say this is the must-see. This is a must-see for Spider-Man fans. Okay, that's really good. And last one, I was skeptical. This is one that speaks to me because I also was skeptical. I was skeptical of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, but I ended up really enjoying it. If never got sold on the animation, it's interesting, but it does almost everything else right. Love the fresh takes on all the Spidey characters and the writing especially. Best Spider-Man since Spectacular. Best Spider-Man show, I should say, since Spectacular. Okay, so in aggregate, in all, this is, I don't know if this is pulling every single reaction here. I don't know how many critics, frankly, got to see the film or got to see the whole series, but and so I don't know if this article from the Direct was intentionally not, pointing out the more negative ones. But at the end of the day, these reactions are very positive. It points to a very interesting art style that some people like, some people didn't. But most importantly, it seemed like people were attached to the characters. It seems like this is a very fun take on Spider-Man. And I think at the end of the day, that's all you can really ask for. So my excitement levels were not very high, admittedly. And now I think I'm mildly looking forward to this. I didn't like the trailers that much, but if this is just going to be an entertaining ride, from beginning to end, then sign me up. And so we'll see if we cover this, just depending on the first couple episodes. If I watch the first couple episodes and I'm like, oh, it's fun, but I don't think there's much to talk about, then we won't really cover it until the very end, probably. But, 2 episodes coming out every single week, and it should be fun. So we'll wait and see how we feel about that. Guys, what do you think about the first critic reactions to Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man? And are you excited for the show now, or were you excited to begin with? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty, guys, it is that time of year. We are heading into Oscar season, and the Oscar nominations have officially been released, so we are going to go over them. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on some of the nominations, some of the things that surprised me, and some of the things I was expecting, and then we will just take a look holistically and see what we can glean. Now, a couple of things before we get into this. Number one is that this is not going to be an Oscar predictions video. I'm actually going to make a separate, in a future segment, probably maybe a week or two before the Oscars come out, I'll do my actual Oscar predictions, my wins predictions. And number two, this is, I'll talk a little bit about the films that I have seen, and a lot of the films that I have seen, you'll have heard my thoughts on these if you've been listening to the podcast. I've talked about most of them, or at least some of the bigger ones, like the Wickeds and Dune Part 2s of the world. But I am currently, working my way actually through a lot of these films that I suspected would be nominated for Oscar films before the list came out. And sure enough, every film that I've seen so far is represented here in some way, even if they're not Best Picture winners. They have some acting categories and things like that. So I am currently working my way through them. I'm almost done, I think, actually. Relatively speaking, I might have maybe 3.5 more, and so definitely getting there. But I feel like I might want to do maybe even either I'll talk about it in that segment that I do later on in a future podcast episode where I predict the winners, and I'll talk about my thoughts on every single one of those films, or rapid fire, or I'll do a separate segment, maybe even that same podcast, where I'll just talk about these films and talk about some of my favorites, some of my least favorite surprises, and things like that. I am, just to also be upfront, I am not a film kind of person. This channel is called Access Blockbusters, but I love movies, right? I love movies, I love art, I love cinema. And yeah, I mean, some of the more, shall we say, bold and out there and, crazy concepts and something, they're just not for me. Some of them aren't, right? Some of them are. Some of the films that are quote unquote more indie and Oscar, people say Oscar bait, but some of those films on these lists I really liked, actually. And I haven't seen a lot of them, or I haven't seen all of them, excuse me. And so I might really like all of them. I will say, though, there are some films definitely on here, on these lists, I'm not going to talk about which ones, that I have seen that, people are like, oh, Oscar frontrunner, this, that I'm just like, I didn't love the film. Either because it just personally was not my kind of film, even though I totally see why people who it is their kind of film would love those films, or I just didn't quite get the hype, and I get it. I mean, everybody has those kinds of films. You look at those lists, and I don't think anybody has ever had a list where they're like, oh, totally every single one of those films, I loved every single one of those films. So just want to point that out. But today, we're here to talk about the list itself. So I'm looking at an article here that has the full rundown from the New York Times, and we're just gonna go from the bottom all the way up. You guys probably know the Best Picture winner or the Best Picture nominees, but just to keep you guys in suspense for a little bit longer. So we're gonna start here at the bottom with production design: The Brutalist, then Conclave, Dune Part 2, Nosferatu, and Wicked. So again, a lot of films that are very beautifully shot. Have a lot of beautifully shot, that's cinematography, but more so just beautifully looking, and just the visual aesthetics and the way that they built the sets and things like that. Yeah, I can definitely see, at least for the films I've seen on this list, because I haven't seen all of them, but I can definitely see that for those films. Best animated feature: Flow, Inside Out 2, Memoir of a Snail, Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul, and The Wild Robot. So interestingly, because this is pretty much the same list as was for the Golden Globes, but for the Golden Globes, you'll remember Flow actually won. Now, the Oscars and Golden Globes don't always line up 100%, although sometimes the Golden Globes can be a good indicator of what's to come. We talked about that in my Golden Globes recap, and so I was really surprised. This might have been one of the biggest surprises for the Golden Globes, that Flow was one of the films that won over Inside Out 2 and The Wild Robot, which is what I was assuming that it was going to be a race between. And so it'll be interesting to see if that kind of momentum carries over. We'll have to see about that, and I'll talk more about that in my official predictions segment in the podcast. Adapted screenplay: Conclave, A Complete Unknown, Amelia Perez, Nickel Boys, and Sing Sing. Not too surprising here, a lot of great films. Original screenplay: Honora, The Brutalist, A Real Pain, September 5, and The Substance. Okay? Moving on here. Best Supporting Actress: Monica, I'm going to mispronounce the names here, Monica Barbaro, A Complete Unknown, Ariana Grande for Wicked, Felicity Jones, The Brutalist, Isabella Rossellini, Conclave, and Zoe Saldana, Amelia Perez. Okay, moving on here. Best Supporting Actor: Yura Borisov, Honora, Kieran Culkin, A Real Pain, Edward Norton, A Complete Unknown, Guy Pearce, The Brutalist, and Jeremy Strong, The Apprentice, interestingly enough. And then Best Actress: Cynthia Erivo, Wicked, Carla Sofia Gascon, Amelia Perez, Mikey Madison, Honora, Demi Moore, The Substance, Fernanda, Torres, I'm Still Here. Best Actor: I'm going through this pretty quickly because honestly, I don't see many surprises here. Like, of course, Mikey Madison, Demi Moore were going to be nominated. Carla Sofia Gascon, of course, Cynthia Erivo, Fernanda Torres. I was told very politely in the comments that I forgot to talk about her, or I didn't talk about her as much in the Golden Globes wins. But yeah, I mean, I think this isn't super surprising. It's pretty much the same group of people, and again, I think that we'll see how far the Golden Globes carries over. But so far, other than so far, really no big surprises, to be honest with you. Best Actor: Adrian Brody, The Brutalist, expected. Timothy Chalamet, Complete Unknown, expected. Coleman Domingo, Sing Sing, expected. Ray Fiennes, Conclave, expected. Sebastian Stan, The Apprentice. The Apprentice is interesting, though, being nominated for The Apprentice, because I would have thought he was going to be nominated for A Different Man, not having seen The Apprentice or A Different Man. But I've heard he's great in both. I just kind of thought he was going to be nominated for a different man. So that might be a little bit of a surprise there. But Sebastian Stan getting an Oscar nomination, he gave 2 great performances from all accounts, and so really happy for him to be recognized in that way. Okay, best director here, as I scroll to it. So Jacques Audiard, I'm gonna mispronounce all these names. Audiard, Emilia Perez, Sean Baker, Honora, Brady Corbett, The Brutalist, Corley, I think it's Farge, The Substance. Again, gonna mispronounce everything, and James Mangold, A Complete Unknown. Now, I have seen, actually, I'll talk about it here. I've seen almost all these films. The only one I haven't seen is The Brutalist yet, so I can't really speak on that film, but I've seen the other ones, Emilia Perez, Honora, The Substance, and A Complete Unknown. And they're great. I mean, the directors, they directed the heck out of those movies. My only question is, Denis Villeneuve for Dune? I mean, big film. John M. Chu for Wicked. I mean, I get it that big budget, quote unquote blockbuster filmmaking might not be seen as sort of the same level as, these kind of quieter, or not even quieter, but just more, low budget, but, smaller stories. But I mean, in a way, that's almost more impressive that they could pull it off and tell a story that I think is worthy of Oscar consideration, no matter what genre, what planet they take place on, what universe. So I don't know if I would have bumped off any of these, necessarily, because I think, again, even if I like or dislike these films necessarily, they directed great, they were amazing at their directing. One would assume just based on the product, but one can't help but wonder. John M. Chu and Denis Villeneuve, I thought, did a great job. So, anyways, there is that. I'm not gonna say snubs. I'm just gonna say that I do wish in a different world that those 2 were nominated as well. And then Best Picture is Honora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, and The Substance, and Wicked. Honestly, this one might be the most surprising to me, because I had penciled in here Sing Sing instead of I'm Still Here and Nickel Boys. And those 2 films were not necessarily on my radar. I might have even said A Different Man would have been there. So A Different Man and Sing Sing. But instead we have I'm Still Here and Nickel Boys. Those are 2 films that I have not seen yet. And so I'm excited to see them. But Sing Sing was one that I thought, everyone was putting on their lists. And I'm Still Here and Nickel Boys were kind of lower down on most people's lists as well. And so it's kind of interesting to see that, those 2 films are included on the list. And I'm sure that they're great. I just haven't had the chance to see them yet. And so I'm looking forward to that as well. Now, I think this article, now that I'm looking at it here, is missing a couple categories. Like, I'm not seeing visual effects and makeup and things like that. And I think those were announced too. So I'm going to go to a different article here and see if we can't find some of those. Yep, I found the other categories. So we're going to run through those quickly, but those were the, the big categories, right? The really, really big ones. But let's get on to some of the other categories here. So this is, going through Best International Feature. Emilia Perez and I'm Still Here were nominated. And Flow too, I guess 3. So 3 out of these 5 films for international features were nominated in other big categories, which is interesting. Documentary, when I do my predictions, I'm not really going to go through documentary because I haven't really seen many of the documentary films. Cinematography, The Brutalist, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, is this Maria? Yeah, Maria. I haven't heard of that film. Nosferatu. That's a stacked category. Those films have really interesting visual languages and cinematography, so I'm excited about that one. Best Costume Design, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Gladiator 2, Nosferatu, and Wicked. Yeah, we're not going to do our predictions here, but I think a couple stand out above the other ones, but we'll get to that when we get to there. Best Film Editing, Honora, The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Perez, and Wicked. We went through Best Production Design. Best Original Score, The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Perez, Wicked, The Wild Robot, interestingly enough. Best Original Song, we got one from an Elton John biopic or something like that, 2 from Emilia Perez, 1 from Sing Sing, and 1 from a movie called The 6888. I've never heard of that film. Best Sound Design, A Complete Unknown, Dune Part 2, Emilia Perez, Wicked, and The Wild Robot. The Best Visual Effects, Alien Romulus, Better Man, Dune Part 2, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and Wicked. So no Deadpool and Wolverine. I got shout out here. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, A Different Man, Emilia Perez, Nosferatu, The Substance, and Wicked. Best Documentary, Best Animated, Best Live Action, Short. And I think that's about it. And so we have here our full list, and it's interesting, right? So Emilia Perez and The Brutalist are carrying the brunt of it. I think that Emilia Perez has 13, which is interesting. And then I think The Brutalist also had a lot of nominations as well there. Wicked also had 8, I believe. No, The Brutalist and Wicked both had 10 nominations, which is really, really, really exciting. And The Substance, I think, also had 10. And then there are others like Complete Unknown, Conclave, Anora, Dune Part 2, Nickel Boys, I'm Still Here, that did really well. And so, look, everybody has different tastes and whatnot, but I think that this year, it has some really exciting films on these lists and on these nominations that I'm excited to, A, finish rounding out my viewing of all these films, and then B, get to talk about them, because I think that there are some really interesting films that I think are not for everybody, frankly. And I think that that's a good thing, actually, because, you have films that are just, everybody likes different things, and I think that different films spoke to my sensibilities, and I think that they'll speak differently to yours. So I think, would I've liked to have seen Denis Villeneuve and John M. Chu get directing nods, for sure, but, I understand that those 5 directors that are on there really deserve those as well. So yeah, I think that just continuing on the narrative from the Golden Globes, also that Anora did really well, right? Anora did really well, but Anora was the front runner heading into the Golden Globes, and suddenly it's Emilia Perez and The Brutalist that are heading it up, and Wicked too. But Wicked, I think, also is getting, because Wicked also had 10 nominations, but it was also being nominated for categories that films like Emilia Perez and The Brutalist weren't, like hairstyling and makeup and costume designs. Not to say that those two films don't have those, but obviously Wicked, it's like, it stands out, right? It really stands out. So we'll have to see where we go from there. But the next time we talk about the Oscar nominations, most likely I'll be doing my predictions and hopefully being able to talk about all the films that I've seen heading into the Oscar season. Definitely going to try to at least get the Best Picture nominations, then we'll see if we can get some other ones off the board as well. So guys, what do you think about the nominations for the Oscars? Are you surprised by anything here, or does everything kind of look like you thought it would? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, we have some concrete news about Avengers Doomsday, and on the one hand, it is pretty disappointing. On the other hand, I think it's fine, and I think that actually there's nothing to worry about. So, we now have confirmation, thanks to a Variety interview with Benedict Cumberbatch, Doctor Strange himself, where he confirms a surprising amount of detail. Now, interestingly, Benedict Cumberbatch, because when he was talking about all these things about the Avengers films, and then at one point he was like, is that a spoiler? And then he just said, F it, in clean language. And it's interesting because Benedict Cumberbatch has been known to be the one on these press tours who is very tight-lipped about spoilers, so leads me to believe either, I don't know, maybe he's going through something, or, maybe he's just, all cares to the wind and he doesn't really care about spoilers anymore. This isn't really a spoiler, guys. Let's be honest. In my opinion, this is probably something where he cleared it for sure, because Variety, it's a big outlet. Like, I'm sure he cleared this with Kevin Feige, and he was like, hey, can I mention that I'm not in Doomsday? And Kevin Feige was like, sure, doesn't matter. And so I'm pretty sure that this was going to be, announced pretty soon. And so we have our confirmation now from Benedict Cumberbatch that he says, and he's very explicit about why, which is an interesting thing, he is no longer going to be a part of Avengers Doomsday. Now, he was never going to be a part of Avengers Doomsday, per se, because what he says in this article, in this interview, is that he was actually going to be a big part of Avengers Kang Dynasty. But that film, because of all the drama with Jonathan Majors, is no longer happening, and he was going to be a part of that film. And he says here that because they redid a lot of stuff with Avengers Kang Dynasty, that he, was no longer going to fit in the picture. And his character of Doctor Strange just was not, he says, quote, the character not aligning with this part of the story, and he is not going to be a part of Avengers Doomsday. However, he does say that Doctor Strange is going to be in, quote, a lot of Avengers Secret Wars. This is what he says, quote, he's quite central to where things might go. And then he says, the character will appear in also a third standalone film. And, that he talks about that a little bit more as well. He talks about how collaborative Marvel is being with the third Doctor Strange film. So that is sort of a side thing that, yes, Doctor Strange will appear in a third solo film as well. But again, the big news here, right, is the fact that, hey, Doctor Strange himself, Benedict Cumberbatch, will not be, and arguably Benedict Cumberbatch is one of the big, marquee actors left in the MCU. Because let's be honest, right? Even Mark Ruffalo, for example, his version of Hulk right now is just not enough to draw people into the theaters. With the way that Thor: Love and Thunder went, I don't think Thor is as much. I'm sure Chris Hemsworth, is close to the top. You have Tom Holland, who I think is a draw, but not in the same way that Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man was, or Chris Evans as Captain America was, right? I think that, it's interesting because, Benedict Cumberbatch was not really, he was sort of a big star in the sense, compared to other MCU characters and actors. And so it's interesting to see that he will not be a part of the Doomsday film. Now, the question then becomes, what then does this say about Avengers Doomsday and or Secret Wars? Well, first of all, him being a big part of Secret Wars, I think is actually, it makes a lot of sense, because I think that whatever's going on with incursions, obviously set up in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, that is definitely going to get paid off in Secret Wars. I think that Secret Wars will be a lot about incursions. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Doctor Strange was not in the post-credit scene for Avengers Doomsday, and wherever he went with Clea perhaps is going to play a big part in why Doomsday happens in the first place. Maybe Doctor Strange is missing, and that's a big part, reason why that the character himself can't be there. But that's also a big reason why the characters maybe get, their butts handed to them by Doctor Doom in Avengers Doomsday. And also what that indicates to me, because there are a lot of rumors going around, and again, I don't look at every single rumor, I don't, just pay attention to every single scoop or whatever, but a lot of the rumors going around that indicate that there are going to be some Avengers teams formed by Captain America, Sam Wilson, also Captain Marvel will be there, probably Wong will be there, so Wong will be there to represent Kamar-Taj and represent the mystic arts, but Doctor Strange himself not being there, obviously he disappeared at the end of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and I think it might indicate, and this is what I've been saying all along, we talk about, is Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield going to show up in Doomsday and Secret Wars? And I go, for sure, Secret Wars. Like, if I had to bet anything on these characters like Wolverine, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, and Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield showing up in Secret Wars, for sure, I would, it's way higher than 50-50. But in Doomsday, I wouldn't be surprised. I've been saying this for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if Doomsday was much more self-contained, right? I mean, Infinity War was a huge universe-trotting kind of film where they went everywhere and whatnot. But it's almost like, comparing it to the first Avengers, like maybe it's just really Earthbound. Maybe it's just bound to a single city, like New York City again. I don't know again, but, maybe it's just bound to Earth, right? And, things just happen. Dr. Doom just shows up there. And then Secret Wars is the big explosion of Battle World and whatnot. That might be my indication of what's going on here. And this might be really a battle of, strength and a battle of just hero against villain, the Avengers, right? Whoever the Avengers are, you're going to probably see them reassemble here in Avengers Doomsday to fight off this threat of, this guy, Dr. Doom, who is he? Kind of looks like Iron Man, whatever. And then at the end of the film, maybe Dr. Doom wins, Dr. Doom loses, but whatever happens at the end will probably set up the events of, it'll set off a chain reaction that heads towards Battle World or Secret Wars or whatever they're doing with that. So I think that's what this indicates here. Also, like we talked about in the rumor segment, Doctor Strange 3 will happen. And I think we talked about in the rumor segment of the question is really just when, right? When is it going to happen? And, but yeah, Doctor Strange 3 being, happening is pretty much a lock. I would say, there's probably a better chance it comes out after Avengers Secret Wars at this point. So looks like Benedict Cumberbatch will be sticking around for a while, and seems like he's pretty game to do that. And then, Doctor Strange himself as a character is not like Spider-Man, where you need to be young perpetually, unless you're telling a middle-aged Spider-Man story and you're swinging around and doing all these physical things. I mean, Benedict Cumberbatch is probably just waving his hands around, behind a blue screen, and sure, the wire work and whatnot, but I think this is a character where, and also he has the gray in his hair already, like the character does, so, this is a character that he could be playing for quite a while. So, anyways, we've gotten confirmation now that Benedict Cumberbatch will not be one of the characters returning for, one of the actors returning for Avengers Doomsday, but, we've had, yet to receive a full cast list, and so I'm looking forward to when that will happen. Maybe at Comic-Con we'll get the cast of Avengers Doomsday while they're in the middle of filming. We'll see what happens there. What do you think about Doctor Strange not appearing in Avengers Doomsday but being a big part of Secret Wars, and also confirming that he will have a third film at some point? Let me know in the comments down below. Alrighty guys, so we have a very interesting update in the world of Star Wars, and every time I feel like I say that, it's never a good thing, because Star Wars is just in a perpetual state of chaos, especially when it comes to its movies. But, to be fair, we're coming off the high that was Skeleton Crew. Loved Skeleton Crew. What an amazing show. We have Andor Season 2 coming out, and I have no reason to believe it's not going to be just as good as the first season, so that's exciting. And then later on next year, Mandalorian and Grogu, Ahsoka Season 2, we'll see if it, can be better than the first season. But the films, right? The films have been just in a state of absolute chaos for almost the entire tenure of Kathleen Kennedy. I mean, think about it. You had, the Rogue Squadron movie announced. You had Benioff and Weiss, who were the creators of Game of Thrones, were going to develop a trilogy. Rian Johnson was going to develop a trilogy. Taika Waititi was going to direct a film. James Mangold is directing a film. There was going to be a Rey Skywalker movie that's just now nowhere to be seen. There was going to be a Boba Fett movie. There was going to be an Obi-Wan movie. And then those two got turned into series with different directors and different creative teams. It's been an absolute disaster, right, in terms of Star Wars movies, and not to mention the drama with Rogue One, which thankfully turned out great because I love Rogue One, and not to mention the drama with Solo, which, I think Solo is fine, and thank goodness it's fine because that production was a disaster, right? So Kathleen Kennedy has had her problems with creative differences, shall we say, with her filmmakers. And so that's the reason why we haven't gotten a Star Wars film in, has it been now, 6 years? And we're not going to get one for, at the minimum, 7 years between Rise of Skywalker and Mandalorian and Grogu. And the question is, what is the next film going to be? Well, it seems like James Mangold is, going full steam ahead on his Star Wars project at some point, because he's got to direct a Star Wars project, he's got to direct Swamp Thing, he has other projects to work on, so who knows when James Mangold, I keep mixing up their names, James Mangold is going to direct his Star Wars movie, and that's going to be The Dawn of the Jedi, and that should be interesting, but I think he's kind of busy, though he is seeming to head into production, or starting to think about the production, at least somewhat soon. But then, another project, not to mention, I should also mention the Kevin Feige, Michael Waldron project as well, that's crazy that didn't happen. So anyways, but another director who had gotten attached to a Star Wars project was none other than Shawn Levy. Now, Shawn Levy is the director of Deadpool and Wolverine, but not only the director of Deadpool and Wolverine, he's also done films like The Atom Project for Netflix, and he's also directed and been, I think, one of the key contributors, storytellers, writers alongside the Duffer Brothers for Stranger Things, one of my favorite shows of all time. I think Shawn Levy is amazing. He did Free Guy as well. He just has a wonderful sensibility about him, where you kind of sit up and pay attention whenever he's directing a film, for me at least, because it's great. And so he was attached to direct a Star Wars film. We had no idea what it's going to be about. And I just kind of chalked it up to, we'll see. It'll come out, maybe, or maybe not, because none of the other Star Wars projects have come out. Well, The Hollywood Reporter has now come out with a headline, with an article here, that is seeming to indicate it's going to be happening very, very soon, or at least it's going to head into production, which doesn't mean it's not going to get canceled eventually, because other Star Wars films have been in production and then had all sorts of chaos and turmoil with it. But this Star Wars film, directed by Shawn Levy, is heading into production very soon. We're going to talk about that in a second, because apparently it's getting fast-tracked. And not only is it getting fast-tracked, it's getting fast-tracked because the star of the film is going to be none other than Ken himself, Ryan Gosling. So let's look into this article here and see what we can glean. So the first thing that the article talks about is that the details of this Star Wars project are pretty hard to acquire, other than the fact that it's not going to be related to the Skywalker saga. So that's another thing that we can, another Star Wars project that it's not going to be connected to the Skywalkers. It's just going to be its own standalone project. That's interesting. So again, but the article points out it's unclear whether or not the Jedi or the Sith are involved, and how far and how close it is to the Skywalkers. Nobody's been able to tell. It seems like, based on these sources. Now, the interesting thing, right, is that the article goes on to say, and I'm going to just read out this paragraph here because I think it's super interesting. So it says, quote, "Sources say the Gosling development is a late-in-the-game move for Levy's movie schedule. The filmmaker was eyeing to direct a boy band movie set up at Paramount, which could have reunited him with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. That was going to be a boy band movie that Ryan Reynolds was writing, I think, and then Shawn Levy was going to direct. It was just going to be their big reunion, kind of film after Deadpool and Wolverine, because they seem to have loved working with one another. Anyways, the quote continues, "But Gosling's interest and involvement suddenly shifted the Star Wars project into hyperspace. If a deal makes," that's an interesting way to put that. Anyways, "if a deal makes, the project would continue to fly like the Millennium Falcon." I don't know if I love or I hate the puns here that the Hollywood Reporter is putting in. But anyways, "it will fly like the Millennium Falcon, becoming not only Levy's next movie, but also the next Star Wars movie to go into production, with cameras potentially rolling this fall. The Mandalorian and Grogu wrapped up in mid-December and will be released on May 22nd, 2026. And then it goes on to talk about the fact that Ryan Gosling is an A-lister, and Star Wars usually doesn't go after A-listers, which is true. I mean, Adam Driver certainly wasn't an A-lister. Now he's pretty well known. Daisy Ridley, obviously, John Boyega, they were good actors, but they didn't have that huge resume. Kind of similar to, I think Harrison Ford and Alec Guinness were probably the most well-known people in the original Star Wars. I'm probably forgetting someone famous, but, Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher weren't super well-known, and they point out, Liam Neeson was the A-lister in the prequel trilogy. But yeah, so it's interesting because Ryan Gosling seems to have basically walked up to Disney and was like, "Hey, I want to do a Star Wars film." And it seemed like however he got attached to it, he was eventually attached to the Shawn Levy project. So much so that it seems like Shawn Levy is just ditching his boy band movie for now. It could always come out later, and just fast-tracking the Star Wars movie. Do we take this to be a good or a bad thing? Let me just address the Ken. He's not Ken. He's Ryan Gosling. I almost called him Ken. The Ryan Gosling aspect first. Is Ryan Gosling being in a Star Wars movie a good thing? Absolutely it is. I mean, Ryan Gosling, first of all, and the article points this out, 3-time Oscar-nominated Ryan Gosling. That's not a small feat, by the way. For Ken, he was nominated for an Oscar, and I mean, let's be honest, Ken was a very singular kind of performance. It's not the kind of dramatic or heart-wrenching kind of performance that most people are nominated for Oscars for. Like, you don't put, for example, Ryan Gosling and say Oscar nominated, Barbie Oscar nominated, Ryan Gosling next to Silence of the Lambs, Oscar nominated, Anthony Hopkins. It's not the same kind of performance, but he was great in it, and he was amazing in it. But then you look at projects like La La Land. I don't know if he was nominated as an actor for La La Land, but I'm presuming that's one of the Oscars. La La Land, one of my favorite movies of all time, and he was great in it. So he's done dramatic roles. He was in The Fall Guy. He has that Oscar pedigree, right, where he can do projects that he is just transformative in. Not transformative in the same way as a Joaquin Phoenix or a Jared Leto, for better and for worse, is, for example, but he really can dive into roles and do the dramatic, right? He did The Notebook, and so he's great in that capacity, but he can also do that blockbuster so well. Barbie and Fall Guy, and even La La Land was a bigger film, not as big obviously, but Ryan Gosling in Star Wars, that's amazing. I think it's actually such great casting. He almost reminds me in a weird way of Chris Pine, in the sense that he just enters any kind of project and you're like, oh yeah, great casting, great casting. And obviously Chris Pine was great in Star Trek as well. So yeah, I mean, sign me up, right? Ryan Gosling being in a Star Wars film. The other thing though, the other aspect of this whole thing is that it seems like Ryan Gosling's involvement really fast-tracked this project. Is that a good or a bad thing? I'm gonna say the jury's out, right? Because on the one hand, great, fast-tracking any Star Wars project to be coming out sooner when there's been radio silence on anything Star Wars. Yeah, I'll take anything Star Wars we can get. And if it means, we're going to get this Ryan Gosling movie in December 2022 or May 2022, 2027, great. I think the more Star Wars movies, the better, because we've just been starved of good Star Wars movies for a long, long time. So yeah, I mean, that's great. But on the other hand, this worries me a little bit too, because it almost, is screaming that same kind of reactivity that Kathleen Kennedy has been known for. Usually it's for the bad, right? It's for the worst, because she's usually axing projects and getting rid of people, and firing people and creative differences and whatnot. But, in this case, I wonder if this is the same kind of tendency where she's like, oh, great, Ryan Gosling wants to do it. Shawn Levy, let's go. And I mean, for the record, if Shawn Levy has a great idea for a film, it may not be a bad thing, right? So I think on the surface and even, just in general, great thing, right? I think it's a good thing that Ryan Gosling is going to be in the next, post Mandalorian and Grogu Star Wars movie. I hope that this is not one of those reactive things where Kathleen Kennedy is like, hey, shiny object, Ryan Gosling, Shawn Levy, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Fall Guy, Barbie, let's do it. And then she just kind of greenlights it without having any idea what's going on. And then Shawn Levy, makes writes a script, and she's like, wait a second, I don't like this. And we have the whole chaotic mess that a film like Solo does. I hope that's not the case. I really do. Because if this can happen, and if it, just goes off without a hitch, just as much as any production can go off without a hitch, then yeah, sign me up for a Shawn Levy, Ryan Gosling Star Wars movie. I can't wait for that. So we'll have to see where that goes from there. Guys, are you excited that Ryan Gosling is apparently going to star in the next Star Wars movie after The Mandalorian and Grogu, and it's going to be heading into production soon? If the rumors and the reports are to be believed, let me know in the comments down below. And everyone, that will do it for this episode 62 of the Access Blockbusters pod. A lot of crazy things going on. Ryan Gosling in Star Wars, if that movie ever happens. Doctor Strange having a big role in Secret Wars and not Doomsday. A lot of fun stuff. Of course, the Oscar nominations. I'm still working my way through those movies, but hopefully by the time we do our official Oscar predictions, I'll have seen most of the major ones. And I've been enjoying the journey. Even if I haven't enjoyed every single movie, I've been really enjoying the journey thus far. So guys, thank you so much for joining again to another episode of the Access Blockbusters pod. If you are interested in audio only, we have Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and let me know in the comments what you are looking forward to out of any of the topics. That'll do it for me for this episode, and I will see you guys in the next one.